Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Champions of Self podcast. Today, I'm very excited to introduce our special guest, Lisa King. She is an international speaker. She even spoke at TedX, which is awesome. I always want to do that. She's an international bestseller, helping to write a book. She's got a lot of great things to teach us today, and I'm excited to introduce her. So, Lisa, hello there, and how are you?
Hi, I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. And Lisa, you're just right outside of London, right?
I am. I'm very close to Heathrow, not far from Twickenham Rugby Stadium.
Well, this is awesome because, on a personal note, this means as of today, this podcast is international. So makes it exciting for me and hopefully for the listeners too.
Fantastic.
So, Lisa, I'm excited to talk about our subject today on the masks that we wear. And that was related to the subject you spoke about in your TEDx talk. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's something that is very passionate, that I'm really, really passionate about. And it's something that I believe we all have. We all worn masks at some point. So I really wanted to be able to share my story and be able to give some tools to be able to recognize and then sort of unmask. So that was the topic. Yeah.
Perfect. So right before we get into that, let's hear a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Right, okay, so my name's Lisa King. I'm 49, just turned 49 years young, and I'm an international best-selling author, an international speaker, very proud to say a TEDx. I was a TEDx speaker. I was given that opportunity, which was brilliant. And I call myself the clarity trailblazer. So I help people to get really clear on who they are, what they want, and I help them to be able to achieve that. And I've been in the health and fitness industry for 25 years. And so helping people has always been a real passion of mine, but it always used to be more around the physical side, as opposed to getting deeper into the mental health side of things. And after my partner's suicide, which was 10 years ago, I had a breakdown. Mental, emotional, physical. I decided I was going to go for the full works on the breakdown front and really went for it. And yeah, and then literally after that, I realized that I really needed to understand why I kept having certain patterns happening with regards to relationships. There was ill health as well, that I recognized that patterns were happening. And after speaking with individuals, I realised that I'd had a lot of coping mechanisms in place from early childhood and trauma that had then shaped my beliefs. And I was pretty much literally living the beliefs, even in my 40s, of a 5-year-old who had sort of created these masks and these coping mechanisms as such.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great segue. I don't even have any questions. Let's just go right into it. Tell us about some of you can either go right into the things that you talked about from your TEDx talk, or because you mentioned, you're in your 40s, but it's something from your childhood, being a 5-year-old. Let's hear about what happened and the masks that you wore. The terminology that we always use is, hey, we had some emotional pain from the past, or maybe from a couple weeks ago that we haven't gotten over yet. And so what you're going to teach us today is how we cope, maybe some masks that we wear to try to protect us. And that's what we do with any behavior we turn to. We try to either resolve the pain or protect us from the pain. So let's hear what you have to say.
Okay. So when I started to understand that I had a lot of emotional trauma that I really needed to uncover, I knew that I had to understand where it had come from. So rather than trying to cover anything up, everybody's different how they look at things and how deep they want to go. For me, I knew that I had to really look at the cause and where the limited beliefs is a general term that people use. And I needed to understand where it had come from. So for me, I got the help that I needed. I spoke with coaches that were really trained to help with the trauma that I had endured. And it was around domestic violence. So I was brought up in a household where my dad was very violent and very, very manipulative. So my mum was constantly working long hours and sort of trying to please everyone else. And I was then sort of creating all these different beliefs around why my dad didn't love me, why didn't he turn up to my party, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable. So all of these beliefs were being formed by a young child who was really trying to work out why, with a 5-year-old's brain, why is dad abandoned her again? Why has he lied again? Why is, all these different things. And the mask that really formed then, because life was a secret. We didn't really tell anyone what was happening. And for me, I didn't want the questions as I grew up. Through my formative years as a child, I sort of lost my spark. I was that kid at school that, even though I was really bright and I was in the top grades, I was somebody who would, either have to be the one that's being really loud, or being the one that's the joker in the pack. And that always now, to me, makes me really think, what is there something that could potentially be going on for a young person if they are behaving in that way? Because that was what my coping mechanism was. Right. Because I didn't want people to know. So that was sort of in my younger years. That was the mask, and it was a bit like a jester.
Oh boy!
So so it was like that. It was, for me, it was really the more I joked, the less people would question what was going on for me. So I didn't want to be sad. I wanted to sort of always have a smile on my face, so that I didn't get asked.
Yeah, and you know what? That brings up a memory for me, and I know some people who can relate with me too, where I've been blessed to have a lot of leadership positions, but I also found that being a leader or being busy was a type of mask that I used, because, for whatever reason, I wasn't comfortable getting into a group with somebody because I didn't want to be vulnerable. Maybe I was like, well, I don't know how to relate with these people, so I will just stay in charge and stay busy, right? So that I don't have to open up and talk to them. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's and you do, when certain things come up and triggers, because it doesn't have to be, when we talk about emotional trauma, it doesn't have to be something that, I have people say, oh, that must have been awful, I've not had anything like that happen. It doesn't have to be that. It could be a comment somebody made. It could be something that a family member has said that they don't even realize the significance, but it could have a huge significance, especially to a young person who's still trying to work out who they are. They're trying to work out where they stand in their different peer groups or in their family. And we do really create like, not a label, but it could be anything. And from that, what then happens is patterns of behavior form based around that belief, which could be said a really flippant comment, but to that person, they've created a belief around it, which then has a massive effect on behavior.
Exactly. Oh, I love that you brought that up, because a lot of people hear this term emotional pain and they immediately think of trauma. And just like you said, they're like, well, I haven't really had any trauma. But to your point, and this is huge, and I hope that everybody listening can really relate with this or understand this. Sometimes it is a comment that happens in a formative time of your life that really, really affects you. And the thing is, it affects you so much because with all that we've talked about so far today, it's something that we just don't talk to anybody about. So it happens, and we're either so embarrassed or so ashamed, or we don't even know what we're feeling. And it's so uncomfortable that we're like, wow, I don't even know what to do except run and hide in my room.
Yeah.
And then that stays with us. And now that event becomes almost a nightmare. And it scars us. And it says, wow, what in the world happened? Now it starts to create a possibility of triggers. So-and-so called me ugly at school that day, and I was wearing my favorite outfit. And it was somebody who was important to me, and it was in front of my friends. That totally scarred me, right? That's an example of some sort of emotional pain that definitely creates these behaviors, makes us start to wear masks. Because in that situation, we might say, well, I guess it doesn't really matter what I wear because everybody's going to call me ugly anyway. Or so much for my friends. I don't really have friends. See all these sorts of thoughts
Yeah.
that can come.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's what you said is a really good point. If it's somebody who matters to you and it's at a certain point in your life, I'll give you an example. One of my grandparents who I idolized, she's still with us, and who was the don of our family, to literally said, so I was talking about all these great plans I wanted to do, and I wanted to set my business up, and this is what I want to do. So this would have been late teens, sort of early 20s. No, you're not, you can't do that. You're not good enough to, you're not clever enough to do that. And at the time, I believed her. And the problem is when you believe something that somebody says, it goes into your subconscious. It doesn't stay as a conscious comment because you've actually believed it and put meaning to it. So for me, what that did is it compelled all the feelings I had about my dad. It then added a huge another meaning to it, but by somebody else who I absolutely adored. So for that sort of thing, it sort of cemented it. So anytime I then sort of excelled and tried new things with business, I'd always sabotage myself without even realizing.
Yeah.
All linked to that.
Man, so much good stuff. Another thing I wanted to bring up, because this idea of it doesn't have to be traumatic. Now, if it is, obviously that's valid and that's huge and everything we're talking about applies. But if it doesn't, it reminds me of the movie called I Can Only Imagine. Have you seen that movie?
I don't think I have, no, but I definitely will be now.
Oh, it's a great movie. It's the story behind the group called Mercy Me and how the song I Can Only Imagine was written. So
Okay.
the father was an alcoholic to the point where his wife left and he abused his boy. And the boy grew up having dreams, but the father said, dreams are worthless. They don't get you anywhere. And the thing is, we don't know the father's backstory a ton, but it turns out that the father is so against dreams and he turned to alcohol because when he was young, he had a dream of being a football player and he must have been injured or something, and that dream was shattered. All of a sudden, he couldn't become a football player. So his belief for many years turned into, don't waste your time on dreams because they won't be fulfilled and you'll only be disappointed and maybe turn into an alcoholic like me.
Wow.
So he told that to his boy, but his boy was like, but I have a passion for singing. I love music. I really want to write something. And long story short, he wrote the words that to this amazing song, I Can Only Imagine, that helped him forgive his father. And he came through and overcame the emotional pain of growing up with a father like that, alcoholism and everything else. And that was just so powerful to me. I bawled on the airplane. My goodness.
Yeah. It's huge.
This is where this idea came to me. Where, oh my goodness, we do have emotional pain from whatever source, and it can totally affect us. It can say dreams have no possibility, or it can say life has no hope, or it says this is why I turn to this behavior. But the missing link for most of the world is the why. Maybe they don't understand why somebody is an alcoholic, why somebody has no hope. And if we can share stories like we're doing today that say, maybe it is an emotion that happened from years ago or whenever, a traumatic or one of these experiences, a flippant comment, like you're saying, these are true. Let's discover them. Let's talk through them because that is so healing. And then, wow, hope comes back in your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the generational environments are huge, and it became so prevalent for me after my journey with my dad. My dad lives in the Philippines. We talk, politely, and so he's still doing what he was doing, more emotional now than anything else, but he's, so it's still there. But then a few years ago, I was talking to a family member who told me, now this is the first time I'd ever heard it, that my dad would have witnessed very similar to what he then did in our home. So he had not only seen that. Now, what my grandfather saw, I do not know. But what's happening is the generational behavior is coming down the line. And that was why it was so prevalent for me to stop the trend. So I've spoken with all of my family and said, enough is enough. This has to stop, because it has to take somebody to recognize when things are happening, because it's a lot of people said, oh, it's genetics. No, it's not. It's actually been proven. Our environment is 90+% about how we behave. And that's huge. That's
Mm-hmm.
huge. And when young people can accept and have compassion for themselves when things like this happen, because it can be really confronting when you notice that you might be behaving like a parent, or you might be reacting like your friends, but you don't want to. So it could be really sort of triggers like that, without it having to be from a traumatic event. It could be something where you think, but I don't like that. That's not who I am. I don't want to behave like that. Yet they've become so programmed and conditioned to behave a certain way. It's not then until that sort of happens you think, actually, I need to look at this because this doesn't feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Where a couple ideas that come to my mind, where the dad was doing it because of the way he was raised, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't realize that. So we may start to have, and it might sound harsh, but it's true. We might start to use the excuse of the belief that says, I wear this mask because my dad did, and my family wears the mask. So that's just how I live, right? But what we do in conversations like this is to say, it doesn't have to be that way. Let's understand why you wear the mask. Maybe they wear the mask because they're afraid, because they're afraid that they don't know any other way, and it's uncomfortable. Okay, that's understandable. Maybe they're angry and they don't know any other way to show that anger.
Yeah.
Maybe they've been sad and they don't know how to deal with that. So guess what? Those emotions, even though they might start scary because we don't really know how to handle them, we weren't raised in an environment like that, we can start to talk about it in a safe environment and say, yeah, what are you sad about? I'm sad because I don't feel good enough. All right, well, let's talk about that. What has told you that you're not good enough? And let's work on things. Or actually, I'll bet you there are things in your life that tell you you are good enough. Let's start focusing on those. Take off the mask, change your story, totally in your power.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good time to talk about one of the masks that was really, really huge for me, which is the Lone Ranger. So for me, what this did as a child, and this could be anything from having a friend let you down, and it could be something like really, really simple that you may not even realize what it is, but that could have actually triggered you to think, actually, I can't trust them if they can't be a friend, or they might say something to somebody else about you. It then triggers a meaning for you, and that could then snowball because you believe it. Then your brain then looks for something else to think, oh yeah, okay, you can't trust.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
what you do now is let's look for something else. And this Lone Ranger mask I had real trust issues, because for me, I was let down by somebody who was my idol. I looked up to him and he let me down. So when that happened, I built huge barriers around me, huge. There was that which affected my business, affected relationships, but most of all, it stopped me from being vulnerable. And that, to me, letting people in and being able to really talk about how I felt was a real issue for me. And it got bigger. This snowball got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this mask may as well have been welded to my face.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, it was that stuck. But I have to say, what I did was started to ask for help. I spoke to people and just took one step at a time to build that trust and start to really talk about things in a way that you feel comfortable. Everybody's different. So find a way where you feel that you can ask for a bit of help and build up that trust and let that vulnerability go bit by bit and uncover who you are, who you truly are, and love who you are. And I have to say now, vulnerability used to be my biggest weakness. Now it's my superpower.
Ooh, I love it.
It's the
That's
best
so
thing
good.
yeah, best thing.
Here's something that we have not spoken about in any podcast, but I feel like this is a good time. Another reason why I do what I do is because I started to see in people's eyes a type of emotional pain that comes from relationships. Okay. I love what you said about it's as if the mask of the Lone Ranger was welded to your face. It became something that you probably didn't realize anymore, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of time, and I can speak from experience as well as seeing other people. If they've come to a certain age and they're not married yet, they probably have had a relationship that they really, really loved the person,
Yeah.
or had spent a lot of time with them, and they were either not proud of some things that they did, or their heart was broken, right?
Yeah.
And it was broken to the point where now they wear that mask and they say, well, that hurt so bad that I'm never going to get hurt again.
Yeah.
What that also means, though, is that I'm never going to open up again.
Yeah.
And it is so difficult, can be, because of those behaviors. And then again, to your point, how do you get through that? How do you realize that you have a mask welded to your face when that's all you see in the mirror and you're like, well, this is me. I don't even know anything different.
Yeah.
It comes from talking to people in a safe environment, like you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about doing it bit by bit. It really is. And I know that some clients, they've said to me, oh, I can't verbalize it, because actually speaking, because when you hear what you're saying, it actually makes it more profound. So some people can't do that. So what I've done is said, right, okay, write it down.
Mm-hmm.
Write it down for somebody. If you want to share, but you feel too vulnerable to speak it, write it. Write it down and just write what you're comfortable with doing. And bit by bit, you can start to trust and start. There's no judgment. I think vulnerability is such a beautiful thing when you have it and you're comfortable with it. But it can also be one of the scariest things when you've never done it, or when you were vulnerable, somebody took your heart and ripped it to pieces, because that's how it feels, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
It does feel like that. So, and I'm not going to pretend that it's going to take, it'll be done quickly, because it won't. And especially if you've had it such a long time. I had mine for 40 years. So my vulnerability was huge.
Right.
And it did feel uncomfortable. Let me be really real with you. There's going to be some doubt, there might be some denial, there might be some resistance, but I promise you, take one step at a time, speak to somebody that you trust, and build up what you're saying step by step, because I promise you, it will be a challenge, but it will be so worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So worth it. And I really do believe that the right people do come along at the right time. I do believe we meet people for lessons. We meet people to bring us out of our shell sometimes. So it may be that you get into a relationship with somebody that might be a friend. And it could be it's a friendship as opposed to a relationship. But you may be able to use that friendship as a way of breaking down the barriers. It doesn't mean to say you have a relationship with somebody, but even a friendship with somebody, and get those barriers down. But do start it. And it will be challenging. It will be challenging at times, but reach out when it does.
Right. I like that. I'm going to finish on some thoughts with that, and then I want to ask you how somebody can know if they have a mask welded to their face, right? So we'll get to that in a second. But to finish this idea of the relationship, like you were saying, and I've said before, talking about it to somebody or writing about it. And we've talked about the importance of those things. Yes, it can be scary. It probably will be scary at first, but taking the first step is important. A lot of people that I talk to, or they hear what I say, I do hear from them and they're like, well, I'm just not ready to talk about my emotions. I'm not ready to write it down or anything like that. Okay, I get it. Yes, you need your time. I wouldn't want to be forced either.
Yeah.
When the time comes, just realize this is what you're going to go through, because knowing helps dispel some fear.
Yeah.
You will have to be honest with yourself. You may have to experience some emotions that you've been hiding or running from. But when I did it, when I spoke to my therapist, I did experience the feelings of embarrassment and shame and fear and everything else.
Yeah.
But because it was in a safe environment and I was ready to trust somebody or give it a chance, I was able to successfully do it and move on from it. And it has been so worth it.
Yeah.
So back to that question. So somebody's like, and this is what you and I talked about the other day on the phone. How do I know if I have emotional pain? How do I know if I have a mask on my face and I just don't realize it?
We all have our true values. We all know who we are deep down, but because of different things that happened, it's as if, like, the dirt is piling up and it's piling up. We're starting to lose ourselves behind it. But I do believe that when things happen, it could be a trigger. It could be somebody has said something. Say you're in a group of friends and your friends are behaving a certain way and you don't feel comfortable with it. And it may be you've spent so much time around them that you're used to being in that, around that behavior, but something isn't sitting right. You either feel a guilt around what they're doing, an embarrassment, and you won't show it. You won't show it to them because you're part of this group and you need the connection. There may be a reason, lots of different things, but you know that you're not quite comfortable with what's going on. You don't know why you're not comfortable, but something isn't feeling right. That is a sign that underneath you know that that's not who you really are. But because of wanting that connection, that's what you started to do. And ask me how I know, because that was and we do it because, and it's like in a job. Let's say, give an example of, say you're new to a business and there's a culture within this business of behaving a certain way so that you're accepted, so that your boss likes you, so that your peers get on with you. And you think, oh, do you know what I'll do is I'll do what they do and then I'll be who I am. But I just need to get my feet under the table. I need to just get them so they like me, and then I'll be myself. That happens so often in a business environment when people go in, and then because you feel that things are, they may then not like you if you come step from behind the mask. People don't, but they're a different person when they leave work. When you know that you're being a different person in different environments, look at what feels right. Look at where you lose track of time with people. Look at where you love being with people and there's no pretense as to who you are. You are totally happy and comfortable with who you are, and there's no niggling doubts. There's no feeling uncomfortable or any negative emotions come up with behaviour around you. That's when I started to look at the people in my life. I looked at who was around me, who I enjoyed being around, and I walked away. I stopped doing certain jobs that I always had my own businesses. So I would be really choosy on the contracts that I picked after that, because if it wasn't in alignment, or I didn't like their values, or I got a feeling about them. There was just something, I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something I didn't like. That's how I started to know. I started to understand what my values were and what was important to me and what I stood for. Yeah. And then anything else that felt uncomfortable around that, that's when I started to realise that the mask was starting to come off. But you do have to go inwards and look at who you are and what really matters to you, not what matters to everyone else.
Exactly. I can't remember if it was your TEDx talk that I just listened to or somewhere else I heard it, but as you're doing this, we might think, oh, I'm going to lose all my friends, all the people who care about me or that I'm usually around. But when you're true to yourself, the people who matter will stay and the people who don't matter will leave. It makes room for everything that you need in your life, right? Was that you said that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is initially when this started to happen, because I was always the one, I had money, loads of fun, I'd always buy drinks, etc. But then when you have a breakdown, you really do notice who's around, because you can't go out and buy all the drinks and things like that. And at the time, when I started to realise that people around me didn't value me or see me the way I really thought they did, that was really confronting for me, because I then had to think, oh, wow, okay, I could lose all my friends here. But the beautiful thing is that the people that really matter, they were always there. And then the people that, they really didn't enhance my life, and they weren't there for my struggles. So why should they be there when I'm thriving if they weren't there when I was struggling? And basically I just said, you know what, I need to have some space for some amazing new people that are going to come and love me for me.
Mm-hmm.
When they moved away and I stopped seeing them, the people that came into my life when I was me was stunning. Absolutely stunning. Because they love you for who you are. There's no pretense, there's no masks. And to be honest, if they didn't like it, I really weren't bothered. Because I love me. I didn't need anybody outside of me anymore. I didn't need external validation from anybody. I didn't need external connection from anybody. And I can honestly say now, you're talking to somebody who always had to be around people who couldn't be on their own. Now, I know regardless of anything that happens, I'll be okay because I have me.
Right. Nice. So
I
big.
never thought I'd be able to say that ever.
Yeah. It reminds me that we all have a deep fear of not being good enough. And if I'm not good enough, nobody will love me.
Yeah.
So the thought was coming to my mind as you were talking. If a listener is thinking, well, what if I don't love the person under the mask?
Okay.
We have those feelings, right? I mean, yeah, that is a deep fear that we all have. Even those of us who've taken off the mask, it happens every once in a while, right? We're tempted to put that mask back on.
Yeah, you can't put it back on once it's off.
Exactly.
But the thing is, you've got to love all of you. There are some parts of me where I'm like, oh my God, and it might be that, I might behave a certain way and it isn't nasty on it. It could be just an irritating thing that I do. It's part of me, and embrace it. Because honestly, perfectly imperfect is one of my brands. And it's one of my brands for a reason. Nobody's perfect. Be perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
And love who you are and embrace good and the bad, because that's what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's perfect. Don't ever think anybody's perfect, because they're not.
Oh yeah. Even though they might seem it, even though we might wish it for ourselves, boy, we can get by it and say, be okay being imperfect. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. I think this is such valuable stuff for everybody to hear. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I would say what's really, really key is have integrity, be true to who you are, stand by what's important to you. And if anybody comes along that doesn't feel right, who you don't agree with, be okay with standing up for who you are. Don't feel that you have to behave differently. Be who you are at all times, because the right people will leave your life and the right people will stay.
There you go. I love it. Thank you. So Lisa, if somebody wants to get a hold of you or contact, or what am I trying to say? Connect with you on social media. How can they do that?
So you can go to my page. So it's actually called Lisa King page. That's my business page. Mm-hmm. And that's really the best place to get hold of me. And you can send messages on there. Absolutely fine. I would say at the moment, Facebook is the place to get. I'm rebranding, which is really exciting. Got loads of things happening. And there's going to be lots of new things. My TEDx is available to be seen. And it's called Unmasking the True You. So I'd love it. And if anybody wants to contact me, got any questions, please feel free to get in touch. Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining. And everybody, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. There were so many valuable things shared on this Champions of Self podcast. And we will talk to you next time.